The making of a legend, a life built on music, love, and faith. Long before her name became tied forever to Johnny Cash, June Carter Cash was already part of American music history. She was born in 1929 in Maces, Spring, Virginia, into the Carter family, the first family of country music. The Carters weren't just performers, they were pioneers. Their harmonies and raw Appalachian sound laid the foundation for what country music would become. And from the moment June was a child, she was surrounded by songs, instruments, and audiences. It was as if her life had been scripted by destiny to be told through music. But what set June apart wasn't just her family's fame, it was her personality. She was funny, sharp, and unafraid to speak her mind. Unlike many women in her era who were expected to play quiet, supporting roles, June had a spark that demanded attention. On stage, she could pick up a guitar, a banjo, or an auto harp and command the spotlight with ease. Offstage, her wit and humor made her magnetic. She wasn't content to be background harmony. She wanted to shape the music to tell her own story. Her career began early, traveling with the Carter family on radio shows and tours across the country. At a time when America was still reeling from the Great Depression, her family's music carried hope. And June, still barely a teenager, was part of that light. By the time she was an adult, she had established herself as not just a Carter, but as June, an entertainer in her own right. She even pursued acting, studying drama, and appearing in television shows, proving her talents went far beyond music. And yet, for all her strength and charisma, June's personal life was filled with challenges. She married young twice, and both marriages ended in divorce. In an era where divorce carried heavy stigma, June's personal struggles could have broken her spirit. But she never allowed failure to define her. She leaned on her faith, her family, and her love for performing to keep moving forward. She was resilient, a quality that would define her until the very end. The turning point of her life came in the 1960s when she began touring with Johnny Cash. At the time, Johnny was already a rising star, but he was also spiraling. Addiction haunted him, his personal life was crumbling, and his performances often teetered on chaos. June stepped into that whirlwind, and instead of being consumed by it, she became a stabilizing force. Onstage, the chemistry between them was undeniable. Their duet Jackson captured that fire, playful, teasing, passionate. Offstage, their connection grew deeper, though it was complicated by Johnny's addictions and the collapse of June's second marriage. For years, June was torn between protecting herself and helping Johnny. She resisted his advances at first, knowing the danger of getting too close to a man in self-destruction. But love has a way of defying logic. June eventually fell, not because Johnny was perfect, but because she saw the broken man behind the fame, and she believed in redemption. In 1968, after years of turbulence, Johnny proposed to her on stage during a concert in Canada. She said yes, and from that moment, their love story became legend. But June's role in Johnny's life wasn't just as a wife. She became his anchor. While Johnny battled pills and alcohol, June prayed with him, pushed him, and even staged interventions to save his life. Many say without her, Johnny Cash wouldn't have survived the 1970s. She sacrificed her own peace for his salvation, proving that love in its truest form is sometimes painful. But she wasn't just living in Johnny's shadow. She continued her own musical career, writing songs, recording albums, and performing with the Carter family. June Carter Cash lived a life that was as vibrant as her music. She was fiery, resilient, and deeply devoted to her family and her faith. And yet the same qualities that made her shine also meant she carried heavy burdens. She gave herself completely, to music, to her children, to Johnny. That complete devotion was beautiful, but it also meant that when her time came, her absence left a hole too large to fill. The devastating end, how her final days shook the world. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, June Carter Cash had lived a life that few could rival. She was respected not just as the wife of Johnny Cash, but as a musician, songwriter, and performer whose influence spanned generations. She had earned Grammys, released acclaimed solo work, and remained a central figure in the preservation of country music heritage. But behind the applause, her health was beginning to fail. Age and years of stress had taken their toll. In early 2003, June faced a serious heart condition that required surgery. For her family and fans, the news was frightening but not shocking. She was 73, and heart problems at that age often mean risk. Still, June's resilience gave people hope. She had fought for decades, through divorce, through Johnny's addictions, through the demands of fame, and had always emerged stronger. Surely she would pull through again. On May 7, 2003, June Carter Cash underwent heart surgery in Nashville. The procedure was meant to save her life, but complications quickly arose. Despite the best efforts of her doctors, her condition worsened. For more than a week, she fought to recover, surrounded by her family. Johnny was by her side every moment he could be, despite his own failing health. He was frail in a wheelchair, his body broken by diabetes and years of abuse, but he refused to leave her. Witnesses described the heartbreaking image of the man in black weakened and weary, clinging to June's bedside, whispering to her, praying with her, and telling her he loved her. On May 15, 2003, June Carter Cash passed away. The news spread quickly and the country music world fell silent. One of its brightest voices, one of its fiercest spirits was gone. Tributes poured in not only from fellow musicians, but from fans across the world who had felt her warmth, her humor, and her honesty. For many, June wasn't just a celebrity. She was a reminder of what it meant to live with passion and faith. Her death devastated Johnny Cash. Friends and family said he was never the same afterward. The man who had relied on June as his anchor, who credited her with saving his life, suddenly found himself adrift. In interviews recorded just weeks after her passing, Johnny's voice was broken, his eyes heavy with grief. He said he looked forward to being with her again, a statement that foreshadowed his own death. Just 4 months later, on September 12, 2003, Johnny Cash followed her, leaving behind one of the most enduring love stories in music history. The tragedy of June's death was not just that she was gone, but that she left in the very moment when her presence was most needed. Johnny's health was collapsing and her absence accelerated his decline. For fans, it was as though the universe itself had decided their story was complete. June and Johnny were meant to leave this world together, just months apart. It was poetic, but also cruel. Her funeral was a testament to her impact. Country music's biggest stars gathered to honor her, singing the hymns and songs she loved. Stories were told of her humor, her kindness, and her unshakable faith. She was remembered not just as Johnny Cash's wife, but as a woman who had carried her own spotlight, who had lifted others, and who had lived a life of purpose. Even today, more than 2 decades later, June Carter Cash's death remains one of the most heartbreaking losses in country music. It wasn't just the end of a life, it was the end of an era, the silencing of a voice that had carried across generations. Her beauty was in her resilience, her devotion, and her laughter. Her devastation was in how much she gave and how deeply she was missed when she was gone. Johnny without June, the loneliest summer of his life. When June Carter Cash took her last breath on May 15, 2003, it wasn't just a wife that Johnny Cash lost. It was his lifeline, his compass, the one person who had pulled him out of darkness more times than he could count. In the weeks after her death, the man in black became a ghost of himself. Friends, family, and fans could see it. His voice cracked when he spoke of her, his shoulders sagged under grief, and the fierce performer who once stood tall now wheeled himself through the world like a man waiting for his own ending. Johnny had always been fragile in health, but June's presence had given him strength. She prayed for him, nagged him when he stumbled, and reminded him why he had to keep living. Without her, he felt the ground beneath him collapse. In interviews filmed during that summer, Johnny admitted openly that he was ready to go. He said his only real comfort was the belief that he would see June again soon. Those words weren't dramatic, they were prophetic. Everywhere he turned, reminders of June surrounded him. Their home was filled with her laughter, her clothes, her instruments. The songs they had sung together echoed like ghosts. He spent hours watching footage of them performing, tears streaming down his face as he relived the moments when her energy carried him through. Friends said he would whisper to her as if she were still in the room. His world became a shrine, each corner filled with the weight of her absence. But what made those last months unforgettable was the music. Instead of retreating in silence, Johnny turned his grief into sound. With producer Rick Rubin, he recorded a series of haunting tracks, his voice frail but burning with emotion. Every note carried the shadow of June's loss. One of the final songs he recorded was Hurt, a cover of 9 Inch Nails' haunting ballad about pain and regret. The performance was raw, his voice breaking, his body visibly failing, but his soul pouring out. And in that song, fans felt the depth of his grief. The music video filled with images of his past life, and June's presence became one of the most powerful farewells ever captured on film.
Our love is sweet when hearts like ours meet. I fell for you like a child.
Family members described those final weeks as both heartbreaking and beautiful. Johnny's health was collapsing, but he held on long enough to honor June with music. It was as if he refused to leave until he had given her one last gift, his heart carved into sound. His body failed him daily, but his spirit burned with devotion. The summer of 2003 became a countdown. Everyone around him sensed it. The doctors warned his time was short, but for Johnny, that reality wasn't tragedy, it was a promise. He believed June was waiting for him, and each day without her was just another day of longing. On September 12, 2003, exactly 4 months after June's death, Johnny Cash followed her. The love story that had carried them through addiction, fame, and hardship ended the only way it could, with neither willing to live long without the other. It was devastating, but it was also poetic. June had promised to take care of Johnny even beyond death, and in a way she did. She called him home. A legacy written in love, music, and sacrifice. The story of June Carter Cash cannot end with her death alone. Her legacy was far too powerful, too deeply woven into the fabric of American culture. To understand why her loss devastated so many, you have to look at what she left behind. Not just the music, but the lessons, the sacrifices, and the love story that continues to inspire. June's career often gets overshadowed by Johnny's, but make no mistake, she was a star in her own right. She was a Grammy-winning songwriter, a skilled instrumentalist, and a performer who could make audiences laugh and cry within minutes. She co-wrote Ring of Fire, one of Johnny's most iconic songs, but the track was as much hers as his. It was born from her own emotions, her own experience of falling in love with a man she both desired and feared. The fire of that song was June's soul poured into music, and it burned its way into history. She also carried the Carter family legacy. Long after her parents and relatives had set the stage for country music, June kept that flame alive. She brought their songs to new audiences, ensured their style wasn't forgotten, and connected the roots of Appalachian music to modern country. Without her, the Carter family's influence might have faded. With her, it became eternal. But beyond music, her legacy was love. June Carter Cash embodied the belief that love is more than passion, it is sacrifice. She stood by Johnny during his darkest years when addiction threatened to destroy him. She endured public scrutiny, private heartbreak, and the exhausting role of caretaker to a man who was larger than life, but also deeply fragile. It wasn't easy. She could have walked away, and at times she nearly did. But her faith, her stubbornness, and her devotion kept her by his side. She believed Johnny could be saved, and in many ways she was right. Without June, the man in black might have died long before 2003. With her, he lived long enough to carve his legacy into stone. Her faith was another pillar of her legacy. June was outspoken about her Christianity, not as a brand, but as a lifeline. She prayed fiercely, sang gospel with conviction, and grounded her family in the belief that redemption was always possible. For fans, her death was heartbreaking, but also comforting. They knew she believed in heaven, and they believed she was there. For Johnny, that faith became his final comfort, the promise that June was waiting on the other side. Her legacy also lives in her family. Her children, including musician Carlene Carter and her son John Carter Cash, continue to perform, record, and keep the Carter Cash story alive. Through them, June's fire still burns on stage, reminding the world that her voice didn't die, it multiplied. Even today, more than 2 decades after her death, June Carter Cash is remembered not just as Johnny's wife, but as a woman who defined resilience. Her beautiful life was marked by laughter, love, and music. Her devastating death was softened only by the fact that it reunited her with the man she had stood by through storms and songs. And together their story remains one of the greatest in music history. When people talk about June Carter Cash, they don't just recall her music. They recall her smile, her strength, and her ability to turn pain into purpose. She lived beautifully, she died tragically, and she left behind a legacy that proves love, when it is real, can outlive even death. The eternal echo of June Carter Cash. Every legend leaves behind an echo, a sound that outlives the body and carries into the future. For June Carter Cash, that echo is everywhere. It is in the hymns sung in small-town churches, in the voices of her children and grandchildren, in the enduring love story that people still whisper about when they talk of country music. Her life was a tapestry woven from laughter, sacrifice, and faith, and her death sealed her place as one of the most unforgettable women in American history. When fans revisit her story, they see more than just a musician. They see a woman who lived with fire in her veins and grace in her heart. She wasn't perfect. She had failures, heartbreaks, and flaws like anyone else. But that's what made her so real. June's strength came from the fact that she carried her scars openly, turning them into songs, jokes, and lessons. She showed that resilience isn't about never falling, but about rising again every time the world tries to break you. Her love story with Johnny Cash is often romanticized, but its power lies in its rawness. It wasn't easy, it wasn't clean. It was messy, passionate, painful, and redemptive. She married him knowing his demons, and she stayed knowing the cost. For decades, she poured her energy into holding him together when he wanted to fall apart. And yet, she still found time to laugh, to create, to raise her family, and to keep her own career alive. That balance between devotion and individuality is one of the hardest things any partner can achieve. June did it with a grace that continues to inspire. Her death was devastating not only because of who she was, but because of what she represented. In an industry filled with fleeting fame and empty promises, June Carter Cash embodied authenticity. She was genuine. She meant what she sang. She loved fiercely, believed deeply, and never compromised her core values for the sake of popularity. When she died, fans didn't just mourn the loss of a voice. They mourned the loss of an anchor, a reminder of when music was more than business, when it was soul, blood, and truth. Today, her influence continues to ripple outward. Modern country artists cite her as an inspiration. Her children and grandchildren keep her memory alive through music and storytelling. Documentaries, tributes, and biographies remind new generations of the woman behind the name. And every time someone listens to Ring of Fire or Jackson, they're not just hearing songs. They're hearing June's heart, her humor, her longing, her fire. Even in her absence, she remains part of Johnny's story, too. People cannot speak of him without speaking of her. His greatness is tied to her faith, his redemption tied to her love, his final months tied to her death. They are inseparable even in memory, and that is perhaps the greatest testament to her life, that she didn't just shine alone, but she lifted others to shine brighter. June Carter Cash's story is beautiful and tragic, but above all, it is eternal. She lived as a daughter of country music royalty, became a queen in her own right, and left the world as a woman who loved until her last breath. Her devastating death was not the end of her story, it was the moment her echo began. And that echo, carried through music, faith, and love, will never fade. The price of devotion, when love becomes both salvation and burden. To understand June Carter Cash fully, you cannot look only at the beauty of her life or the tragedy of her death. You have to examine the cost. The price she paid for a devotion so deep it saved one man while slowly draining her own strength. June's love for Johnny Cash was powerful, but it wasn't easy. It was a fire that lit the stage and healed his soul, but it also consumed her quietly, piece by piece, until her final days. June knew what she was signing up for when she married Johnny. By the late 1960s, his addictions had already taken a heavy toll. Pills, alcohol, sleepless nights, erratic behavior. She had seen it all from the sidelines before stepping into his life as his wife. Friends often wondered why she didn't walk away. She had her own career, her own voice, her own path. But June believed in redemption. She believed Johnny could be better, and she believed it was her purpose to stand by him until he was. The public saw the glamorous side of their love, the fiery duets, the playful banter, the way their voices seemed made for each other. But behind closed doors, devotion was heavy. June staged interventions, flushed pills down toilets, prayed at his bedside during withdrawals, and endured nights when his demons seemed stronger than his love. She lived in the constant tension between saving him and losing herself. For years, she carried that burden quietly, choosing not to expose his struggles to the world, because she believed in protecting not just her husband, but his legacy. What made June's devotion remarkable is that it wasn't blind. She wasn't naive about Johnny's flaws. She confronted him, argued with him, demanded better. She wasn't a victim of his darkness. She was a fighter within it. But every battle took something from her. Every relapse meant more sleepless nights. Every scandal meant more pain. Every time she had to pick him up, she sacrificed a piece of her own peace. That kind of devotion can save a man, but it also wears down the one giving it. By the time June reached her later years, the cost of that devotion was etched into her body. Her health had declined, her energy drained. She had lived not only her own life, but Johnny's too. In many ways, her final years were marked by exhaustion, the kind that comes from decades of carrying someone else through storm. And yet she never complained. She still laughed, still prayed, still performed, still gave. To the very end, June embodied sacrifice, the kind of love that doesn't ask for balance, but gives without keeping score. Her death, then, wasn't just the result of a failing heart. It was the culmination of a lifetime of giving that heart away. The surgery she underwent in May 2003 was meant to repair what time and illness had broken, but perhaps no doctor could ever repair a heart that had spent 73 years giving so much. June didn't die because she was weak. She died because she had given everything she had. To her family, her faith, her music, and her husband. The price of devotion is often invisible until it is too late. June's life shows us both the beauty and the danger of love that consumes. She saved Johnny Cash from himself. She built him up, stood by him, and refused to let him collapse. But in saving him, she gave pieces of herself that could never be returned. And when she was gone, the world finally understood how much she had carried. Johnny followed her just 4 months later, proof that her devotion had been his lifeline. Without June, there was no Johnny. And without Johnny, June's sacrifices might never have been fully recognized. Her story then isn't just about music or romance. It's about the reality that love is both salvation and burden. It can heal, but it can also exhaust. It can create miracles, but it can also demand sacrifices too heavy for one person to bear. June Carter Cash bore those sacrifices with grace, humor, and faith. And though her death was devastating, it was also a reminder that devotion in its purest form is both the greatest gift and the heaviest price.